Two Doors Down. It's about time.
Time heals. Give time, time. Regina Brett.
Pain, loss, and hardship are moments. Time is a continuum. Are there moments when time alone isn't enough? Let's reflect on how time transforms our perspectives and explore what else heals us. Let's go.
It sounds like time does heal us, but does something else can heal us too?
Well, love.
Love's a good one. Love's pretty strong. I
Yeah.
think that works.
I think an argument could be made that love is even better than time as a healer. But, our podcast is about time, so
Yeah.
I think maybe we
I
should
I think
explore
time is
maybe
important
both.
in healing, yeah.
Grace is urgent. So grace is urgent, not important. Wisdom is important, but not urgent.
And how does that fit in
Okay,
healing?
so let's put it this way. We have this, in order for grace to have any kind of a relevance in a circumstance, then we have to have this pre-existing condition that we have already offended. So we have offended God, we have offended our neighbor, we have offended our wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then grace then has an opportunity to take center stage. Through love, a person can gracefully offer forgiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but in order for forgiveness to have any role in it, for grace to have any role, you have to have already done something wrong. So, I think it's interesting because people, human beings, are attracted to urgency. They want to hear the sensational story of a building burning down, right?
Right.
But nobody wants to pay for a headline that talks about a developer that had enough wisdom to install a sprinkler system in his building so it never had a fire.
Yeah, that never makes it to the news.
No,
does
that's
it?
not going to make it to the news, is it? Right? So I think that's interesting because grace and forgiveness, those are all things that, and love even, those are all things that are what I would call reactive. And that anything that is related to wisdom is proactive.
Oh, that
right?
makes sense.
So
Okay.
you're preventing something from going sour by
Right.
using wisdom.
Right.
Making a decision that prevents something from offending. Whereas the opposite is true the other way.
You know, I do think time is important. I think love is important too. But I think you have to walk through something to heal from it. You have to feel it. You have to let it bleed. You have to give it time. And the deeper the pain, the more time it takes to heal. But it brings us full circle back to I love you anyway.
Mm. Yeah. I love you.
I love you too, Chris. So I have a story for you that I think is a perfect example of grace. Anna was riding her bicycle home from college one afternoon in May. It happened to be her birthday, and she was looking forward to celebrating with her young daughters when she got home. However, she was struck and killed by a car that drifted off the road. A few days after the funeral, Anna's mother, Kathy, called the home of the young man who was driving the car.
This is the car that struck
That struck Anna.
Anna, and
And
Kathy is Anna's mom.
Kathy is Anna's
Okay.
mom. This young man's mother answered the phone, and the first thing Kathy said was, "We want you to know that we forgive your son, and we want to be sure he's doing okay with this." I mean, that's a gift of grace, isn't
Wow.
it? It also happened to be just before Mother's Day, and so Kathy said, "I want you to have a good Mother's Day. I don't want this to bring you
Wow.
down because we have no ill will, and we're going to try to have a happy Mother's Day ourselves."
Mm.
So Kathy and her husband, along with Anna's daughters, spoke to the judge in his chambers before the young man's sentencing. They all wanted mercy. The judge was astounded and told Kathy that their gift of grace renewed his faith in his job. He'd become disillusioned with the lack of mercy and grace and said he'd struggled because there was no room for love in the justice system. But this moment reaffirmed his belief and commitment to justice.
This is a family who have been seriously offended. Their daughter has been killed, and they have enough grace through love to offer forgiveness.
Yes.
And then use this horrible event as a way to get a message to the rest of the world.
Yes.
And change the world.
That's right. And so eventually the young man was sentenced to community service. And since then, the two families have become close, vacationing and sharing holidays together.
Wow, that's pretty good.
In fact, Kathy and the young man's mother travel the country sharing their story, and it's powerful.
But I have to say that it takes a level of character and understanding, a deeper wisdom about, you have to have a lot of experiences under your belt to be able to dip into that powerful level of grace.
Yes. And Kathy and her family are Christians, and they believe that they're doing what God would like them to do.
And healed, just ta-da, it's not a destination. It's not this final resting place.
That's true.
Healed, healing it's a continuum.
That's true. And in reaching out to this young man and his family and asking for mercy, it let Kathy and her family get over the loss of Anna. And now they don't look at it so much as a tragedy. They look at it just as a moment in time.
Interesting. Well, time is to love what importance is to urgency. So, just to explain that a little bit more, time and love are both healing elements, right?
Yes.
But time is something that's long-term, deeper, more meaningful maybe in some ways. Time is it's a certainty. It's something that is what I would call it's proactive. And that's different than love. When love is a healer, that tends to be, that's when mom picks you up after you've fallen off your bike and scraped your elbow,
Yes.
and she kisses your elbow
Yes.
and says, oh baby, coddles you and makes you feel better. That's an immediate response that makes you feel better right away. And that's urgent.
Yes.
Right? So I like the difference between those two.
Yes.
But they lean on each other.
That's true. I think they go hand in hand. And so, this episode has brought up a lot of things in my life that I've been working through. And specifically, a few years ago, 18, 19 years ago to be exact, when I had the brilliant idea to help John Maynard escape from prison.
Infinite wisdom.
Infinite wisdom, the most brilliant idea. But it created this rift in my family because there were some family members who struggled to find a way to let me back into their lives. And I used to tell myself, I'll give them space, I'll give them time. Time will heal this. Well, we're coming up on 19 years now, and it hasn't been healed yet. And one of my girlfriends, I was talking to her about this week, and she said to me, maybe healing looks different to them than it does to you. And maybe they feel healed. Maybe they're content with where they are. And that really opened my eyes because to me, healing would have meant that we rebuilt our relationships and we could move on. But perhaps they're not meant to be rebuilt. Perhaps I just need to accept the fact that I have moved on and I have let go. And maybe that's the best healing that I can do.
And I think it's important to note that in some respects, healing is about perspective. And your perspective, you were looking at healing originally back 18 years ago. You were thinking that healing had a specific definition in your mind. You had expectations.
Yes.
And the healing that took place did not meet your expectations, so you were resisting the idea that any healing had taken place.
Yes.
When in reality, as time went by, a lot of different evolutions of your healing and their healing had taken place, and you started to recognize that you don't feel as bad as you used to feel.
That's right. And you know, one of my friends said, Toby, you need to release the bridge that takes you back. How can you move forward if you're holding on to that old bridge?
Right.
You know, let it go. If it
Yeah.
comes back around, you'll build new relationships with them. But you've just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's important that you recognize that you're not resisting or declining a relationship. It just may be a different type of relationship.
Yes.
Even with your family.
Yes.
If that comes up later.
right,
So,
right.
Yeah.
So I think it took a long time to get there, but it was a big thing to work through.
well, relationships are more than just relationships between individuals. There are relationships, for instance, in our country, the Civil War was an answer to slavery.
Yes.
And so Civil War, the Civil War here in this country, half of our country knew something was wrong, and the other half also knew something was wrong, but they were willing to double down to keep it that way.
Ooh. That's
So half the country wants to do something about it, and the other half the country is willing to fight to preserve it the way it was.
Yes.
And so we wind up being violent toward each other. That's pretty powerful, and it just kind of it makes it very, very difficult. Well, let's just take a look. Here was a reading that I picked up today, and I thought this was interesting. This came from, we purchased this book at a yard
a
sale?
whole series of them, yeah.
Yeah, Time Life Books. This Fabulous Century is the name of this, and this particular book is 1960 to 1970.
I think there's like 7 or 8 of them, and they cover each a 10-year period.
Interesting. So, in the middle of this book, maybe right in the center of this book, there's an entry here referencing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In August 1963, some 200,000 persons marched on Washington to demonstrate for civil rights. The climax was this moving plea.
I have a dream.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
So powerful. Probably one of the most powerful speeches ever written, I think, ever delivered. He had a way about him in speaking.
Well, here's where the rubber meets the road. And I got to say that what I'm about to share with you is probably going to be a bit controversial.
Ooh.
So if
Imagine.
I'm going to say something controversial, then you better put on your seatbelt.
I guess so.
All right. Here's what I was thinking. I don't know why I thought of this, but I thought of this maybe a decade ago. But the United States we had a civil war, and it was over slavery. And clearly, there have been serious wrongs, offenses committed against black people to drag them from their home countries and to bring them here. And you know, my family came here in the 1920s, which, me just saying that sort of implies that I'm absolving myself of responsibility over what happened in slavery and the Civil War. But realities here are that there's nothing that I can do. I can't say sorry enough. I can't pay reparations. I can't do anything to go back in time and undo what this country did to these black people that they brought here and enslaved and used and abused and made them to build our country. I can't do anything to resolve that. And that's where I would beg that the only move forward is if these people that have been offended would dig deep enough into character and divine love to be graceful enough to forgive us, to forgive this country for what we did to them.
That would be powerful.
There's no other way forward. We can't fix what's been wronged. It would be a divine thing. It would be a godlike thing for people to actually be able to say, we know that you did wrong, but we love you anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That's what God did.
Yeah. I mean, we made progress, but there's a long ways to go, I think.
Yes, there is.
And I think it's going to happen. I think it needs to happen.
But, you know, forgiving us is not about us anyway.
That's true.
It's about them.
It is. It's always about the forgiver.
It lifts them out of the negative space, the feeling of anger and bitterness and...
Well, really, it empowers you. When you forgive someone, it empowers you.
It puts you...
to step into your true power and become the person
higher.
You can be. Yes.
Yeah, it places you on a pedestal that raises you up. Yes,
Yeah.
it does. So, sort of in the same ballpark here, I did some research today and I found a book. Well, you and I had visited the World Trade Center.
Yes.
And that was
in New York.
I don't know, several years ago maybe. And while we were there, we
was
purchased...
when we stayed at the Atlantic Motor Inn.
Oh,
that's
was it?
Another story.
Oh,
Yes.
no way. Is that true?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
We'll have to share that on another episode.
Yeah, that was quite a story. That needs to fit in here somewhere.
Yes,
but,
it
okay,
does.
but not today. All right, so while we were there, we purchased this book. It was like $25 for this book, and we bought the book and we brought it home. It sits in our library, and today I was perusing the library and decided that I'd take some time to peruse this specific book. And there are tons of absolutely beautiful examples of forgiveness and love and grace and healing, and the whole event of 9/11. 4 planes get hijacked. They take off at different times. So flight 175 left from Boston and hit World Trade Center Tower 2, which was the South Tower, and flight 11 was the one that also left Boston and hit the North Tower, which was the first one to get hit.
Do you know how much time was between those two planes?
I
don't
think
know.
it was like an hour and a half, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it's interesting because the second plane that hit the World Trade Center 2 which was the south tower, hit it lower in the tower, which meant there was more heavy weight above the burning
Yes. It was the first
damage.
to collapse.
And so that forced the collapse to happen sooner.
Yeah.
There's lots more in this book, but I just wanted to read this. This is interesting. This is the dedication. It says, this book is dedicated to the 2,983 men, women, and children taken from us in the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and February 26, 1993. To the thousands of rescue and recovery workers whose determined efforts paved the way for the healing and rebuilding, and to everyone who has contributed to the creation of 9/11 Memorial Museum, so that, through remembrance and education, we can honor them all and affirm an unwavering commitment to the fundamental value of human life. Fundamental value of human life. Love it.
Yes.
Okay, so page 183, the complexities of displaying World Trade Center dust.
Ooh. Dust.
I just thought that was
What a title.
I had no idea what that was going to be about, and I had to read to find out. But when I mentioned it to you, you picked up on it pretty quickly. But let's just read these couple of paragraphs. On September 11th, 2001, Roger Hawk fled his 54th floor law office in the North Tower shortly after hijacked Flight 11 cut its fatal path through the building. His evacuation down the crowded stairwell was, in every sense, arduous. Upon reaching the street, he waded through debris from the fallen South Tower before reorienting himself, and then walked 5 miles north to his daughter's apartment to shower off the grit covering him. Hawk's safe arrival occasioned intense mutual relief. Loath to track dirt into the apartment, he left his dust-covered shoes at the door. He would later recall the dust on the windowsill. You know, you'd pick up the dust, and then you'd wonder what was contained in that dust, whether it be a piece of flying paper that came down, whether it be a concrete girder, whether it be just an ordinary piece of New York dirt, whether it be an eyelash, whether it be, you know, someone's helmet from one of these young firefighters who walked up the stairs. Everything was dust, recalled Raymond Thomas, a now retired lieutenant with the FDNY, who responded downtown shortly before the collapse of the North Tower. There was no office furniture. There were no computers. There were no flower pots. There was nothing but dust, grayish, brownish, burning dust.
Oh, wow. That's pretty profound.
So basically what they're saying is that one of the problems with displaying dust
Well, there's
is that in that dust
probably
there's human remains.
Human remains in that dust, and yeah, that's a dilemma for sure.
It is. So in the sense of having I thought one of the things that were interesting in this book, this is sort of a side note, but in the book they mention that they sat down, they were an army of people that got together and tried to figure out how they were going to put this memorial together. And one of the things they were concerned about is they thought one of their options was to actually have video of, like, for instance, the people that were falling out of the tower or jumping out of the tower during the event. And they thought maybe they'd have a video of that to show that. And then they thought, well, wait a second, if they have a video, then what if it memorializes that one particular guy, and it kind of diminishes that there were
Everyone
another
else,
50
right.
or 100 or 200 people that also jumped that day.
Right.
So that's something that they were concerned about. But the other part of it they were concerned about is what happens if this video plays over and over and over and over for millions of viewers, and it's like this thing that just keeps this one guy jumping out of that tower forever, over and over and over again. It's not,
and that's
there's
not
something
where
kind
he'd
of
want to be stuck.
Right.
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah. There was something.
His life was more than that.
Right,
Whoever that person was. So you know what, Chris? I think we need a little lighter moment here. So I'm just gonna. I've already mentioned it. I'm just gonna fill in the Atlantic Motor Inn.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
just for a sec.
Chris and I were driving from Boston, and we were coming through New York City, and we decided we'd stop and spend the night because I happened to get tickets for the Liberty or Statue of Liberty the next day. And I was it was late. It was like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and we're trying to find a hotel. And
We just Googled the spot.
yeah, everything
We
I
had no
looked
idea
at
where
was
we're going to.
$500 a night, $700 a night, and I found this one place that was like $100 a night. It was the Atlantic Motor Inn in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So we booked it, and we pulled up, and you stopped the car so I could go in and check us in. And it was the strangest place I'd ever been because
Scantily clad women were standing in front
the
of the door.
whole lobby was full of them.
And you went inside and stood next to a whole bunch of them while they were all looking you up and down. A lot of them were, you could see that the level of clientele here was
I realized when I checked in, I learned that most people book their hotel by the hour. We were the only people for quite a while that had booked an entire night. And I came back out and I told you what I saw in there, and I said, "What should we do?" And you said, "Bring our bags in."
Yeah.
And so we didn't just stay one night, we stayed 2 nights.
Yeah.
And you actually
I got in the elevator with one of these prostitutes, and she looked at me and I looked at her, and she was pleasant, she was polite, and she was respectful, and she just said, "How are you tonight?" And I said, "I'm doing just fine." Yeah. And we got out of the elevator, and when I got back to the room, I went into our room. You were already in the room. And when I got into the room, you and I got into the room together, and we could hear the room next door
was in use.
Was very much in use.
Yes.
It was
quite an interesting 2 nights.
Yes.
But I'm so glad we did it. It was actually fun.
Yeah. Well, it was fun, but I got to tell you, it was risky too.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't as risky as we thought.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't really all that bad.
Well,
but there was
my first wonder was when the attendant in the hotel lobby was behind bulletproof glass with a little window to slide your card under.
Yeah.
That made me kind of think,
yeah,
I'm not sure about this.
Yeah, the neighborhood was quite questionable. It
Yes.
was
But it was fun. It was fun. So that was a good distraction.
So Toby, how do love and time intersect in healing?
I really think they go hand in hand, because really the comparison between love and time as healers depends on perspective. You mentioned earlier, like a mother picking up her child who had fallen. I think love provides immediate comfort and helps people process pain in the moment. But time, on the other hand, offers distance and perspective. And sometimes I don't think we can heal until we step back a little bit and give the event a little bit of distance, and we can look at it through a different lens. But time allows the wounds to gradually fade and your emotions to settle. And the deeper the pain, the more time it takes to heal. Time can't erase pain, but it does transform it. And I think, love is a catalyst for healing, while maybe time is the process through which healing solidifies. So the two may work hand in hand, with love providing the nurturing support and time offering the perspective needed for deep, long-lasting recovery. Both are powerful in their own ways, and together they can lead to the most profound healing. So I think they're both important, but I don't think you can really truly heal from something big without time.
Interesting. So I have a story about time and healing.
Oh, good.
And so it's a classic tale. It's amazing, it's profound, it's heroic, it's filled with pain.
Well, it
and
sounds like my kind of story. I love heroic
anxiety.
and profound and anxiety.
Yeah, and bloody socks on the mound.
Oh my gosh. How are you going to work that into this discussion?
Okay, so anyway, let's tell the story. So there's this guy named Dave Roberts, and he gets traded to the Boston Red Sox in June of 2004,
Okay.
which was 4 months before the ALCS. So the ALCS, if anybody's not into baseball, the ALCS is the precursor to the World Series.
So whoever wins
it
that
goes
goes
on
to
to the
World
Series. You're right.
Okay.
And if you do a quick flashback to the 1920s, then you learn that there was a guy named Babe Ruth, was an amazing baseball player, and he carried the Boston Red Sox on his back to multiple World Series and won a bunch of those games back in the 1920s. Well, at the end of his career with the Boston Red Sox, he had a falling out with the management and decided that he was going to go to the New York Yankees where the money was. And when he got to the New York Yankees, that started what they call the curse of the Bambino. So the Bambino is Babe Ruth. And he carried the New York Yankees to a multiple World Series. And the New York Yankees have been fantastic ever since, right? So, if you fast forward to 1986, well, not just 1986, there was 67 and 86 and a couple of other years in there, where the Boston Red Sox were a phenomenal team and did really very well in Major League Baseball. But then in 1986, for example, Bill Buckner was an excellent first baseman, and they should have won the World Series. And it was right down to the last little thing when their opponent hit this, should have been an easy pickup and tap first base, and the game was over, and it was just going to be this amazing situation. Instead, Bill Buckner lets the ball roll between his legs, and they lose the World Series. So they still don't win. So now they've gone 60 some odd years or something. 20 years later, and 86 years into their dry spell and not having won the World Series, Dave Roberts gets traded into the ball club for the Boston Red Sox. 4 months later, they're in the ALCS. They're playing against, wouldn't you know, the New York Yankees. So they're playing the New York Yankees in the ALCS, which between the two of them, they're trying to figure out how they're going to get to the World Series. They've already played 3 games in a series that's the best of 7. So think about that for a second. 7 games that they have
and
to
they've
play.
Already lost
and they've already
3.
lost 3. So they only have to lose one
done.
more.
Okay.
They got through that game all the way up to the 9th inning, and they were behind by 1 run to the New York Yankees. So the bottom of the 9th, the game is over. The New York Yankees just have to hold on just a little bit more, and
Just
they
have to
eliminate them.
3
It's a clean sweep, right? And instead, the Yankees put their closer, world-class closer, like maybe the best closer ever. His name's Mariano Rivera. They put him on the mound, and he does a fantastic job all the rest of the season. But you can see that he's really nervous and something's going on, and you can tell that there's a fervor, there's an energy in the stadium that is just going crazy. And Mariano Rivera winds up walking the first batter for the Red Sox and putting him on first base. That was the tying run on first base.
Okay.
And Mariano Rivera, after he walked him, starts getting nervous because the Red Sox took that player off of first base and they put in Dave Roberts. And Dave Roberts was the fast guy that they had just brought into the organization back in June. And Dave Roberts leads off of first base, way away from the base. And Mariano Rivera is sweating. And he's looking over at first base, and he's looking at home, and he just gets really nervous, and he winds up throwing the ball over to first base, and he doesn't catch Dave Roberts. Dave Roberts gets back to the bag, and he's there, and he waits. And then Mariano Rivera gets the ball back, and he winds up, and he looks around, and he's about ready to, and then he throws over to first base again. And he does that 3 times, trying to catch Dave Roberts.
Trying to pick him off.
Trying to pick him off on first base. And then he finally throws the fourth time that he takes a movement, he actually pitches to home plate. Mariano Rivera does. And as soon as he winds up and lets that rifle shot go, Dave Roberts takes off. And he steals second.
And he slides into second and he cuts his leg on his cleats and he has a bloody sock.
No. And then he stands up and he's safe on second, but now being on second, he's in scoring position. So the next guy that comes up on the first pitch rockets a line drive right up through the middle of the field. It's a single, and he drives Roberts home and ties the game in the bottom of the ninth on a single.
Wow!
And he ties the game. The game goes on into extra innings, and they play for 5.5 hours. Wow! And at the end of that evening, then Big Papi, David Ortiz, big guy, he's Dominican guy. He gets up to the plate and he sails one over the back wall and performs a walk-off home run, which ends the game.
Wow.
So now they've won one game out of 7. So they've won one. They've lost
out of 4. They've played 4 now.
They've lost the first 3. They won the 4th one, and they still have 3 more to play.
So they've got to win every other game.
They have to win all of them, right? So they have to sweep the next 3 games. In the 6th game, 2 games later, that's Curt Schilling. And so Curt Schilling was the pitcher on the mound.
He had the bloody sock?
And he's the one with the bloody sock. The reason he had a bloody sock is because he had some sort of a problem with the tendon in his heel. So like an Achilles tendon kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the doctors, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they were going to cut the tendon and just let it loose so that he could be loosed enough so that he can continue pitching.
Because they didn't want to do surgery before then, because then he couldn't play.
Then he wouldn't be able to play.
So they sent him out with a flapping tendon to play this game.
Yeah, and he excelled, and he wound up winning that game. And we went on to win the 7th game, putting the New York Yankees out of it.
Wow.
So we won the pennant and went on to the World Series, and we swept the World Series that year.
Which means
the first
you
4
win
games
the first
straight.
Games.
Yeah,
wow.
4 games straight. So we won 8 games in a row at the end of the season to win the World Series.
Well, that's a pretty cool story, but what's it got to do with healing and time? Well, I guess Curt Schilling's tendon could heal, but
I don't know if you knew this, but the movie Moneyball, with Brad Pitt, which was about a guy named Billy Bean that brought
it was kind of a true
Oakland,
story, wasn't it?
It is a true story, in Oakland.
He was this really data guy who had all these statistical ways to line up players.
Billy Bean had somebody that was a data guy.
That's right.
So anyway,
he found a nerd.
They wound up figuring out how to do something amazing and amazingly different than anybody has ever done in baseball before. And that's what the Boston Red Sox used to win in 2004, 2 years later.
So they kind of copied him. They said he's doing something that works.
They copied what Billy Bean brought to the
cool.
Oakland A's. Yeah, that's how they got through that. So the point is that 86 years is a long time.
Well, that's true.
Time.
Yeah.
Long time.
Okay.
So it's a long time, but it wasn't long enough for all of the healing that needed to take place in Boston. And all it took was one win of the World Series, which is a very loving thing to experience.
I guess it probably is.
How forgiving, how graceful, how amazing was it to the Boston fans that the Boston Red Sox could bring healing to that whole curse of the Bambino thing. What a ridiculous bunch of crap that is.
Yeah, the whole thing is kind of a ridiculous bunch of crap.
It was amazing. It was amazing. You have no idea how good baseball... I think you'd
have to live there to know it.
The drama of baseball is just amazing. I mean, I know that you like football, and I know.
Yes, I do.
But baseball, wow.
Yeah.
Holy cow, there's some good stuff out there that happens in baseball.
Yeah, cool.
Felony murder. Here we are at our favorite part of the episode. This particular part of our episode is inspired by John Maynard.
Yeah. And, you know, Chris, in 1 or 2 days, it's going to be a month since he died, which is
For our listeners, anybody that doesn't know, then John Maynard is he was convicted of felony murder,
yes,
and he wound up getting a life sentence, and he fell in love with my wife back before she was my wife.
yes,
And the two of them decided that, in their infinite wisdom, that they would offend the state of Kansas, by escaping, aggravated escape in a dog crate.
yeah. It was a crazy story.
There's a lot more to that story, but we'll get to that some more later.
Yeah, so this series really, John Maynard's felony murder sentence just kind of inspired us to speak out and try to make a change there.
Mm-hmm.
So this week I have a story for you that's, every week I find a story that, and I can say it's way different than any story we've had before. Well, this one is, because Sadek Baxter was sitting in the back of a sheriff's vehicle in handcuffs. And miles away, his friend hit two bicyclists with a car. Sadek wasn't present at the scene of the crash, but he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
Because that's this whole thing of felony murder, is that you don't have to commit a murder. You just have to be
You don't even
somewhere
have to
remotely
be there.
You can be remotely involved in a felony, and then if anybody dies anywhere near that felony and any furtherance of the felony, it doesn't matter how they die or who kills them or anything else, then you're on the hook for it. Mm-hmm. First degree.
Right. So Sadek made a really bad decision. He and his friend went out to a Miami casino. They drank heavily. I think they even took some Percocets or something else. And, they weren't in a smart frame of mind. But after losing all their cash
Understatement.
at the blackjack table, Sadek had an idea. To offset the losses, he could steal from unlocked cars in a wealthy neighborhood nearby. Now, O'Brien, his accomplice here, didn't really want any part of it, but Sadek talked him into it. And so while Sadek tested the handles of parked cars, grabbing whatever minor items he could find, O'Brien waited in his silver Infiniti around the corner. Sadek was grabbing some loose change and a pair of sunglasses from a black SUV when the car's owner confronted him and called the cops. O'Brien fled the scene. Sadek was arrested and handcuffed. Meanwhile, O'Brien, in all of his brilliant
Infinite wisdom, again.
trying to escape from this crime that was in the process of being caught, he ran a light and he was struck by another car, which made his vehicle spin out of control, and it spun right into 2 bicyclists, Dean Amilcan and Christopher McConnell, who both died at the scene. Sadek was several miles away in the back of a deputy's vehicle, but prosecutors used the felony murder doctrine to charge both men with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Now, even O'Brien, who was driving the car, if he hadn't been fleeing from this car robbery that Sadek was doing, he wouldn't have been charged with murder. It was an accident. I mean, he ran a red light. He could have been charged maybe with vehicular manslaughter, but he wouldn't have been charged with first-degree murder. Now both of them are serving mandatory sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
So there's a few ways to handle felony murder. Number one, probably the best way, is using wisdom, which is important but not urgent. But basically it means just listen to the adage, you're only as good as the company you keep.
Yes, and
So
if your buddy
choose
wants to do something you don't want to do,
Choose your friends
leave.
very carefully, because all it takes is for you to just be a friend of somebody that is just a little bit off, even if you don't even know it, and they go and they do something and they wind up getting in trouble and maybe somebody dies. next thing you know, you're on the hook for it.
That's right.
So that's number one. Number two is Miranda. Miranda's a friend of mine.
Okay.
Now, when I was a kid, my mother told me to cooperate with the police, but the Miranda law basically says keep your mouth shut.
That's true. And that is important.
So Miranda was a case that went to the Supreme Court, and they decided that any police officer that arrests you and asks you questions must read you your Miranda rights, which basically say you have the right to remain silent.
Yeah. And you should.
Anything you say can and will be used
If
against
you
you in a
have
court of law.
something you want to say that's important, then you say it to your attorney and let him say it to
So
the
the best thing to do is don't say anything at
Right.
all, and just wait until you get together with your attorney. You can always add something to the record later if you need
Yes.
to.
So the really interesting piece of this case, which fits in with what we've been talking about today, is that the three children of Dean Amelkin, who was one of the victims, Ian, Brett, and Chelsea Amelkin, came to both young men's defense in court. In fact, Ian wrote a letter to the court arguing, "This sentence is cruel, unusual, and, in time, will be considered unconstitutional. Now 4 lives, my dad's, Mr. McConnell's, Mr. Baxter's, and Mr. Oakley's, are forever destroyed by the events of August 5th, 2012. You know, it's interesting because his prediction is that in time, felony murder will be considered unconstitutional.
That is the key phrase right there. Unconstitutional. And the reality is that I said that there were 3 ways to deal with this. So we talked about the first 2 ways, but the third way to deal with this is what you and I are trying to achieve, which is to bring it to more clearly to light that,
So that
felony
people
murder,
understand what it is and how it's so wrong.
felony murder is unconstitutional. It violates human rights.
Well, all the other countries in the world, except for us, have eliminated it as a law in their country. And the reason was because they felt it was inhumane and they didn't want it to be part of their makeup in that country.
What is felony murder?
It's a loophole.
It's a loophole. I hate loopholes.
I know you do.
I hate them because they provide some opportunity that not everybody is awarded this opportunity. It's just a few select privileged people. And in this particular case, it's a loophole that allows prosecutors to just take citizens, and put them in prison for the rest of their lives, even if they weren't involved in anything. They don't even have to be a part of the felony.
That's right.
They just have to be
ridiculous.
somehow related to it. They just have to
It's
lend a
just
car to
ridiculous.
somebody
So-
while they're committing a felony or
Yeah,
anything.
right.
It's crazy.
So we're just doing our best
It's been
to
outlawed
educate
everywhere else.
Yeah,
They
right.
abolished the whole law worldwide, except for here in the United States and a little bit in Australia.
Yeah, we really need to not be known for how cruel we are to our criminals.
Yes, we should.
So
So
now it's time to draw a card from our basket and reveal the topic of our next episode. Let's see what time has in store for us.
time and legacy.
That'll be interesting. I think legacy is important to a lot of people. I think it's the reason they do many of the things they do. So we're going to explore that.
Yeah, I already have some ideas in mind.
I can hardly wait. Does it involve bloody socks?
No,
Oh, good.
not my immediate ideas, but I'll try and work it in
No,
somewhere.
I think we've heard that story. As we wrap up today's episode of Two Doors Down, we've explored the power of time as a healer and the ways it can help us process pain and find peace. But healing isn't always passive. It's often about the choices we make along the way, choosing to forgive, to love, and to grow. Time gives us the space to transform, but it's up to us to do the work. Remember, healing looks different for everyone, and no matter where you are in your journey, just keep moving forward.
Share your own reflections and stories using hashtag #TwoDoorsHealer and join the conversation about how we can make the most of the time we're given. This is Christian and Toby Dorr reminding you to make an impact with the moment you have. Two Doors Down. It's about time.
Subscribe on YouTube at Two Doors Down. For exclusive content, check out our Patreon channel. Our website is twodoorsdown.com.
Until next time.